Thanks, Ciara. Look, and thanks for all our witnesses this morning in relation to this profoundly pre-legislative scrutiny around mental health in Ireland, and obviously it's well warranted in relation to a review of mental health care in Ireland. Just a number of questions. And my first question is in relation to kind of what has happened in South Kerry CAMHS. And obviously the IMO's statement is, it's like as other statements that have been kind of, I suppose, shone a light in relation to inadequacies around mental health in Ireland. But it's the picture that is painted is obviously a very honest picture, but quite a bleak picture in relation to the state of our mental health care at the moment. And my first question, obviously, is as the consequences of, in relation to inadequate kind of staffing and so forth, is there a systematic failure going on in relation to CAMHS across the state? Because what happened, I figure it's not an isolated scenario in relation to the overall compensation of medication for children. So if that's the case, then there's a serious issue of trust, and there's a serious issue in relation to CAMHS services across the state. So this is it's very, very serious what has happened, and people want answers because it's in everybody's interest to find what has happened, and is this systematic of the service? So my first question is, in relation to your opening statement, the first paragraph, the consequences of kind of the lack of resources and the other structural issues that are going on. Is this the consequences of that?
I'll start, and I'm sure the IHCA also will have plenty to say on this topic. I don't think anybody in the profession is surprised at what has happened in CAMHS, and nor should anybody in the HSE have been surprised, or in the Department of Health. It is absolutely a system failure, and the rush to doing an audit, to finding somebody to blame, to holding a person accountable, is not going to address that system failure. Now, that might be, there is no easy solution to this, but this may well be replicated across services, not just mental health services, but other services. There has been a decade of austerity in the health service. There has been much longer than a decade of inattention to mental health services. So mental health services got it on the double. They had the inattention and they had the years of austerity. We are incapable as a public health service of attracting people to work in it. That's not just consultants, that is across the board, across all services. We ask people to come in to working environments that are extraordinarily stressful. I don't think there is a professional body now that represents anybody in the health service that is not saying all healthcare staff are suffering from stress and burnout, and the answer will be to do a bit of baking or a bit of yoga at the weekend. We are putting people under enormous pressure. We are not funding services appropriately. We are letting services be delivered when we know that they are inadequate. They have a lack of supervision. The consultant role in the delivery of health services and in psychiatry and in CAMHS, it has been shown that the lack of that consultant being there, and consultant colleagues from Wexford have spoken very eloquently about the difficulties of CAMHS services and the interaction and the community within the acute services. So I am really sorry to say we are not shocked, but what it is 100% a systems failure.
And I'm going to ask probably a very, very obvious question.
Hang on a second, Gino. Just there's a couple of more people want to come in. Yeah, Brendan. I think, just to be very clear, child and adolescent mental health services are specialist services. To deliver the service requires a skilled multidisciplinary team with the necessary skills mix across a range of disciplines. A consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist will have done, in I suppose 10 years, up to 10 years of postgraduate training, at least 3 to 4 years of higher specialist training. Clearly, if that person is not there, or if that consultant is not there on the team, one cannot expect a service to be delivered to the standard, as the public expect of a specialist mental health service. So across the country, we have, there are particular circumstances which I think we need to take into account in Kerry. We need to look at, yes, there has been investment in child and adolescent mental health services over the years. However, we started from a very low base. And in a sense, we had that coupled with an increasing growing population, increasing rates of referral of young people to child and adolescent mental health services. Also an increase, as we know, due post-COVID, a significant increase in referrals to community services, also to inpatient services, a large increase, for example, in young people presenting with eating disorders. It is a fact that on the one hand, we shouldn't be surprised that this is a phenomenon across the world. Across the world, there's been a recognition of a need to expand services. The question is not just resourcing, it's how we ensure that posts and the structures are there to make a recruitment to these posts attractive, because we are not competing just with Ireland, we are competing internationally. We know the standard of training in Ireland for child and adolescent psychiatrists is on par with the best anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, the world is experiencing currently a worldwide shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. Child and adolescent psychiatrists will have no difficulty trained in Ireland getting positions anywhere across the world. So I think this is a reality, but we must, if we are to deliver the services, we need to look at the recommendations in the report, and it's about resourcing, but it's also having the necessary structures in place to support teams such that we can deliver services across the country to the standards that we want them to be delivered to, and that we can attract not only doctors but other skilled disciplines, attract and retain them within the service.
I just want to, I suppose, expand on that and make a slightly broader point, because these difficulties obviously have very obviously beset a specific CAM service in Kerry, but we know that there are resource issues across the country, across pretty much every mental health service that exists. And we know that in 2005, which is now like 17 years ago, A Vision for Change was published, and that set out the numbers of staff and the numbers of multidisciplinary team members that were needed in every team, from CAMs to adult psychiatry to all of the specialist areas. And we know that in a lot of areas, some teams are running at 20% of the staffing, 30% of the staffing, and even the more general community adult teams will often be without key multidisciplinary team members for prolonged periods of time. So we've colleagues all the time who talk about that they have no social worker for 6 months, or the psychologist on their team has become unwell and they haven't been replaced. So this is a problem that doesn't just affect CAMs, and in some ways, until mental health services are properly resourced and the team members that are required are put in place, we are probably going to see further problems, because it is inevitable that if services operate under such a strain, they're going to crack at some point. It is, it's inevitable in many respects. And unfortunately, a service that's under such strain all of the time is not an attractive place for people to work. And if people are getting job offers from New Zealand, where they've a very nice quality of life and their working conditions are very, very pleasant, it's very difficult to dissuade them from going there.
Thanks. And Paul, I'm just going to ask a very, very obvious question, is how do we address them very, very, very serious issues in the here and now? And obviously there is huge problems, I understand, with retention of staff and recruitment of staff. And that's been a kind of a legacy issue for over a decade. But under these circumstances, children that need intervention are being failed, and that's the most serious of consequences of this. So how do we kind of amend the structural issues, particularly around CAMHS, for the here and now? Obviously the review will take place, and as I said from the outset, I don't think this is an isolated situation, but how do we kind of address that very, very kind of the immediate in relation to addressing them kind of trust in relation to children that are kind of and adolescents that are seeking services to CAMHS?
Was a quick, easy answer for you, Deputy Kenny, but unfortunately there isn't. The first thing is that we can't just have an audit. We have to have a full review that looks at all the issues and not just focuses on the action of a particular staff member who is left unsupported. It really does come down to recruitment. If you do not have the professionals on the ground to deliver the care will not be delivered. You can have all the shiny buildings you like, or you can have terrible buildings, and there's a big mixture of both. Not everyone is operating out of purpose-built centres. If we do not have the recruitment policies in place, and I don't accept that the recruitment policy is a legacy issue. The recruitment policy is a live issue. It has been a live issue since the day it was brought in by a former Minister for Health, and it has had devastating effects. And until that is dealt with, until we accept that we cannot run a service without the correct amount of people delivering that care, it is the patients that will suffer. So there is no quick fix. What can we do today? Everybody, and I would make the point, every single person working in that service goes in to do the best for the children who are accessing care in that service. Everybody is committed. But there isn't the level of shock within the service that there might be within other areas looking in on this, because they are working with this day to day. And I think if we keep on talking about recruitment, and no more than my colleagues at the IHCA, we are exhausted for 10 years talking about this, saying it must happen. This will keep on happening if we keep taking the attitude to recruitment, and that our public health services continue to fail, absolutely fail, to be able to encourage doctors to stay in Ireland or come back to Ireland. Our trainees are not going to stay here. They see what it's like for their consultant colleagues. They know they'll come in on inequitable and unfair contracts. They have systems abroad that will support them so that they can support and deliver best care to the patient. So I'm afraid there is no quick fix, but I would certainly say it is not a legacy issue. It is very much a live issue, and government have it absolutely within their power to address it. They have all committed to it. Three ministers, the three last ministers for health have all committed to it, and they have failed to do so.
My final question is in relation to the last paragraph of the statement on the IMO, and it's in relation to private and voluntary organisations that provide mental health care, and there's obviously a plethora of them organisations, and obviously in the statement, the IMO say that there should be requirements to achieve accreditation to international standards. Is there a situation at the moment where these bodies of a voluntary nature or of a private nature don't meet the proper accreditation in relation to, I suppose, standard of care? Is there instances of this happening in the state at the moment?
Simple. I have a very simple answer to that, which I'm not sure. And the issue is we aren't sure. If the Mental Health Commission, I suppose the fear is that the Mental Health Commission will become a body that only regulates the state services. And we know that mental health care is provided by, non-governmental organisations, some which take state funding, some don't take state funding. It's provided by fully private insurance-based hospitals. It's provided by a variety of different services. And I suppose what we are calling there is that to ensure that the Mental Health Commission don't just become, when they expand their remit from inpatient units into community services, that they don't just look at the state-provided community services, that they actually look at the other sectors. Now, it's up to the Mental Health Commission then to determine how they do that and what standards they set and how that is operated. But we do know that the difficulty of talking type therapies is the regulation of them. There isn't a central register of therapists. I can put a plaque on my wall and, well, I suppose I have a qualification, but anybody can put a plaque in their wall in the morning and say, I am a something or other therapist. You could have somebody with very little qualification who has been engaged in exploitation of clients, of various different types, who, unless they're criminally prosecuted, can just, walk down the road and put a plaque up on a different wall and set up again. So it's that security. So my answer is, I don't know. And the problem is we don't know. So it is that the Mental Health Commission not only gets involved in state services, but that they also have some sort of remit towards the non-state orientated talking therapies and therapists and qualifications that are out there, and they set standards of some description, and maybe, I don't know. And again, look, we could talk about, that's probably a session by itself, to be honest with you, but it is that setting standards. Yeah.
Probably quite concerning that there's no kind of central register in relation to private and voluntary organisations. I'm sure they provide a very, very good service. But where there's no regulation, then you have a kind of the opposite.
Oh.
And that would be concerning. Just again, I think you probably have answered the question that I kind of initially said. But barring the kind of the lack of monitoring of bodies as in private capacity and voluntary capacity, how concerned would you be, in your professional opinion, that there is, there may be there's a sense there's no regulation, or there's no sense of a kind of oversight in relation to that those that are in a position of, obviously a very, very kind of important and responsible position in relation to advice and intervention, that there could be a situation where there's no oversight. Where there's no oversight, then you could lead it, to serious difficulties, as in what happened in South Kerry.
Okay. Aileen. I think this is a very real concern. As I mentioned earlier, in primary care, we have essentially no access to talking therapies. And often when I have a patient in front of me who's in extremis, I resort to Google, just like anybody else. And unless I've had a personal recommendation or kind of know from previous patients how they perform, I have nothing else to go by. People are paying money to these people, money that they often don't have, but they are so desperate to access services, this is what they'll do. And anecdotally, you would find often people who may have accessed counselling services themselves previously then want to go on to counsel. And like with all of us, doctors, social workers, occupational therapists, we're all part of a regulatory body and we have to meet certain standards. So if people are having a very big impact on another's life, and that's what often happens in these talking therapy sessions, they have to conform to some kind of regulatory body.